The airport buzzed with the usual chaos, announcements echoing, rolling suitcases clicking against the tile floors, and travelers rushing to catch their flights. Among them was Ayana, a young woman with big dreams and an even bigger determination. She adjusted her blazer, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. This trip was supposed to be the start of something special. A new job opportunity, a fresh beginning. But she had no idea that before the plane even took off, her life was about to change forever. Boarding pass in hand, Ayana smiled politely as she approached the gate. She had always loved flying, the way the clouds stretched endlessly, the feeling of being above everything. It made her feel unstoppable. But as she stepped onto the plane, that sense of excitement quickly faded. "Excuse me, ma'am," a voice called out, sharp and cold. Ayana turned to see a flight attendant staring her down. The woman's expression was unreadable, but something about her tone made Ayana's stomach tighten. "Yes," Ayana responded, confused. The attendant crossed her arms. "I need to see your boarding pass again." Ayana handed it over, her fingers slightly trembling. She had already scanned it at the gate. Why was she being stopped now? The woman glanced at the pass, then looked Ayana up and down. "This seat isn't for you." Ayana frowned. "I'm pretty sure it is. 24B, right?" The flight attendant sighed, rolling her eyes. "I'm going to have to ask you to step off the plane." A murmur spread through the other passengers as they watched the scene unfold. Ayana felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I don't understand. What's the problem?" The attendant's voice dropped, but her words were firm. "We have the right to refuse service. You need to leave." For a moment, Ayana just stood there, stunned. People were staring. Whispers floated through the air. She could feel the weight of every judgmental glance. She wanted to fight back, to demand answers, but she also knew how these situations could go. Arguing wouldn't help. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her carry-on and turned around, forcing herself to keep her head high as she walked off the plane. The moment her feet hit the airport floor, frustration and humiliation washed over her. She had done nothing wrong, yet she had just been kicked off a flight as if she didn't belong. It wasn't fair. But as she sat down near the gate, staring out at the runway, something inside her shifted. She wasn't going to let this break her. No, she was going to do something about it. What Ayana didn't know was that in just 7 minutes, her life would take an unexpected turn. And by the time this was over, she wouldn't just be a passenger on a plane. She would be the one calling the shots. Ayana sat in the waiting area near the gate, her hands gripping the handle of her carry-on. Her mind was spinning, replaying the last few minutes over and over. The humiliation burned deep, how easily she had been dismissed, how the flight attendant hadn't even bothered to explain. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside her. People were still staring, some pretending not to, others openly whispering. She caught bits and pieces of their conversations. What did she do? They just kicked her off like that? That's crazy. But no one spoke to her. No one asked if she was okay. It was like she had suddenly become invisible the moment she stepped off that plane. She clenched her jaw. No. She refused to let this be the end of her story. Pulling out her phone, she scrolled through her emails, searching for something. Anything that could help her make sense of this. Her flight confirmation was there. Her seat assignment clear as day. She had paid for that ticket just like everyone else. She exhaled sharply and tapped her screen to call the airline's customer service. "Thank you for calling Blue Horizon Airlines. How can I assist you today?" A calm, almost robotic voice answered. "Yes, I just got kicked off a flight for no reason," Ayana said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to know why." "Let me check that for you. Can I have your full name and flight number?" She gave the information and waited as the agent typed away. "I don't see any notes on your reservation. The flight is still scheduled to depart on time," the agent finally said. "No notes. Ayana repeated. Then why did they remove me? There was a pause. I'm not sure, ma'am. If the flight crew made the decision, they would have documented it, but I don't see anything here. Ayana closed her eyes for a moment. It didn't make sense. There was no overbooking issue, no security concern, nothing. Then why? Is there a supervisor I can speak to? She asked. I can escalate this, but it may take a few days for a response. Days? She didn't have days. She had a life to get to. A job interview waiting for her on the other side of this flight. She hung up without saying anything else. This wasn't over. A deep voice interrupted her thoughts. Hey, that was messed up. Ayana looked up to see a man standing a few feet away. He was in his early 30s, wearing a gray blazer over a crisp white shirt. His expression was one of genuine concern. I saw what happened, he continued. That was wrong. Ayana wasn't sure how to respond. Part of her was still processing everything, and the other part didn't want to break down in front of a stranger. She nodded. Yeah, it was. I travel a lot, he said, stepping closer. I've seen things like this before, and usually, it's not about the seat. It's about something else. His words hung in the air, unspoken but understood. Ayana swallowed hard. Yeah, I figured. I'm Jordan, by the way, he said, offering his hand. Ayana. She shook his hand, still feeling dazed. Jordan glanced toward the gate where the plane was still boarding. You planning on letting this go? Ayana let out a dry laugh. Not a chance. Jordan grinned. Good. Because I have an idea. She raised an eyebrow. What kind of idea? He checked his watch. That flight takes off in about 7 minutes. You have a decision to make. Ayana wasn't sure what he meant, but something about the way he said it sent a jolt of curiosity through her. What are you talking about? She asked. Jordan leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. You ever heard of Carter Holdings? Ayana blinked. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. They own a big chunk of Blue Horizon Airlines, he explained. The CEO? He's actually here today. Got off a flight about an hour ago. Ayana frowned. And? Jordan smiled. And I happen to know exactly where he is right now. Her heart skipped a beat. Why are you telling me this? Because, Jordan said, his expression serious now, people get away with things like this when no one fights back. I think you deserve a chance to be heard. Ayana stared at him, her pulse quickening. This was insane. What were the chances that someone with connections to the airline's ownership was right here in the same airport? And what were the chances that he actually cared enough to help her? She glanced toward the gate one last time. The flight attendant who had kicked her off was nowhere to be seen. It didn't matter anymore. Her choice was clear. She grabbed her bag, stood up, and looked Jordan straight in the eye. Take me to him. Jordan led Ayana through the busy airport, weaving between passengers rushing to their gates. She could barely keep up, her mind racing just as fast as her feet. What exactly was she walking into? Could she really confront someone powerful enough to make a difference? The hum of conversation and distant flight announcements filled the air as they made their way toward an exclusive lounge area, tucked away from the chaos of the terminal. Jordan stopped just before the entrance, glancing around like he was making sure they hadn't been followed. He's in there, he said in a low voice. Damon Carter, CEO of Carter Holdings. If there's anyone who can do something about what happened to you, it's him. Ayana exhaled sharply. And you just know this guy? Jordan smirked. Let's just say I work in circles where people talk. I overheard one of his assistants mention his flight schedule. Figured it might be useful information one day. Ayana narrowed her eyes. So what's in this for you? Jordan laughed lightly. I like a good story. And I don't like seeing people get stepped on. She studied him for a moment, trying to read his intentions. He seemed genuine, but she'd learned the hard way that not everyone who offers a hand wants to help. Still, what other option did she have? The airline had brushed her off. If she let this go, nothing would change. Straightening her shoulders, she nodded. All right. Let's do this. Jordan pushed open the glass doors, and Ayanna stepped inside. The lounge was a world away from the bustling terminal. Quiet, luxurious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the runways. Businessmen in tailored suits sat in plush chairs, sipping expensive coffee, deep in conversation. And then she saw him. Damon Carter sat near the window, a tablet in his hands, his suit crisp and perfectly tailored. He exuded authority, the kind of presence that made people pay attention when he walked into a room. Ayanna's pulse pounded in her ears. This was it. Jordan motioned for her to follow as he approached the table. Mr. Carter, he said smoothly, like he had done this 1,000 times before. Apologies for interrupting, but there's someone here who needs a moment of your time. Carter barely looked up. I'm in the middle of something. Jordan didn't waver. I think you'll want to hear this. Something in his tone must have caught Carter's attention because he finally looked up, his sharp eyes landing on Ayanna. For a split second, she thought about walking away. But then she remembered the way the flight attendant had looked at her, the way she had been dismissed without a second thought. She stepped forward. My name is Ayanna, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. And a few minutes ago, I was kicked off one of your airline's flights for no reason. Carter raised an eyebrow. That's a serious accusation. I have proof, she continued. My boarding pass, my reservation, it was all in order. But the flight attendant decided I didn't belong. And when I asked why, she refused to give me an answer. Carter leaned back in his chair, studying her. You could have filed a complaint with customer service. Ayanna let out a bitter laugh. I did. They told me there were no notes on my removal. Like it never even happened. Carter's expression remained unreadable, but she could see something shift in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe even a hint of concern. He glanced at Jordan. And what's your role in this? Just someone who thinks this deserves attention, Jordan said. Your airline's reputation is on the line. Things like this don't stay quiet for long. Carter drummed his fingers against the table, considering. Then he nodded. Sit. Ayanna hesitated before taking the seat across from him. You said you have proof? He asked. She pulled out her phone and opened her email, showing him the reservation details. Then, she scrolled to a recording she had taken right after she was removed from the plane. A quick video of herself explaining what had happened, with the flight information visible on the screen. Carter watched without saying a word. When the video ended, he set the tablet down and folded his hands. What exactly do you want from me? Ayanna had asked herself the same question a dozen times on the way here. Did she want an apology? A refund? For the flight attendant to be held accountable? She took a deep breath. I want to know why this happened. And I want to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. Carter was silent for a moment. Then, without looking away from her, he pulled out his phone and made a call. This is Damon Carter, he said, his voice crisp. I need to know why a passenger was removed from Flight 302 without documentation. Find out who was in charge and get back to me in 10 minutes. Ayanna's stomach flipped. Just like that, he was taking action. Carter ended the call and leaned back in his chair. Now we wait. Ayanna nodded, but inside, the tension hadn't eased. She didn't know what the answer would be, but she had a feeling it was bigger than she had imagined. And something told her this was just the beginning. Ayanna sat across from Damon Carter, her fingers gripping the edge of the table as she waited. The quiet hum of the lounge did nothing to calm the storm inside her. Jordan, sitting beside her, glanced at his watch, then at Carter, who remained composed, as if this was just another business meeting. But Ayanna could feel it, the tension in the air, thick and unspoken. Minutes dragged by, each second stretching longer than the last. Her heart pounded as she ran through every possible outcome in her head. What if this went nowhere? What if Carter brushed her off the moment he got an excuse? What if the airline found a way to twist things against her? Finally, Carter's phone buzzed. He answered without hesitation. "Talk to me," he said, his voice sharp. Ayanna held her breath, watching as his expression shifted. At first, he was unreadable, but then his jaw tightened ever so slightly. He exhaled through his nose, nodding as he listened. Whatever he was hearing, it wasn't good. "Send me everything," he said before hanging up. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Carter set his phone down and looked directly at Ayanna. "Well," he said, his tone measured, "it seems you were right." Ayanna's pulse jumped. "About what?" Carter studied her before speaking. "Your removal wasn't random. The flight attendant who kicked you off has had multiple complaints in the past. Similar incidents, all quietly handled. It looks like the pattern was ignored." Ayanna's stomach twisted. She had known something was off, but hearing it confirmed sent a fresh wave of frustration through her. "So what happens now?" Jordan asked. Carter exhaled, tapping his fingers against the table. "I need more information before I act. The problem is, things like this don't happen in a vacuum. If she's been allowed to do this before, it means someone higher up let it slide." A chill ran down Ayanna's spine. "You're saying this is bigger than just her," she said. Carter nodded. "And if that's the case, then I have a much bigger issue on my hands." Ayanna's throat tightened. She had come here just wanting answers, but now it felt like she had pulled at a thread she wasn't supposed to touch. Carter's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, then stood up abruptly. "Come with me," he said. Ayanna and Jordan exchanged a look before following him out of the lounge. Carter moved with purpose, his strides long and unwavering as he led them down a restricted hallway, flashing a security badge at an employee who barely looked up as they passed. They stopped in front of a frosted glass door. Carter entered a code, and the lock clicked open. Inside was a sleek conference room, empty except for a large screen mounted on the wall. Carter pressed a few buttons on a control panel, and suddenly, security footage filled the screen. Ayanna's breath caught. The video was from the gate, just minutes before she boarded. It showed the flight attendant standing near the boarding area, speaking with another employee. The audio was faint but clear enough. "She's not getting on," the flight attendant said, her voice cold. The other employee looked confused. "Why? She's checked in." The flight attendant glanced around, then leaned in. "I don't like her attitude. Make something up." Ayanna's body went rigid. She watched as the employee hesitated before nodding. Then the video skipped forward to Ayanna boarding, completely unaware of the decision that had already been made about her fate. Her stomach twisted with anger, disbelief, and something else, something deeper. Carter crossed his arms, his face unreadable. "That," he said slowly, "is the kind of thing that gets people fired." Ayanna's mind spun. It was all there. Proof. No excuses. No misunderstandings. Just a deliberate choice to remove her from that flight for no reason at all. Jordan shook his head, letting out a low whistle. They didn't even try to hide it. Ayanna clenched her fists. "What now?" Carter's gaze was steady. "Now? We find out just how deep this goes." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy fog. She had thought she was fighting one person, but now it was clear, this was bigger, much bigger, and the storm was just getting started. Ayanna's pulse pounded as the weight of the truth settled over her. She had undeniable proof, evidence that couldn't be ignored or brushed aside. And yet, something about the way Carter stared at the screen, arms crossed, his expression unreadable, told her that this wasn't over, not even close. Jordan shifted beside her. So what's next? You fire the flight attendant, issue a public apology, and fix this mess, right? Carter didn't answer right away. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his jaw, his eyes flicking back to the paused footage on the screen. If it were that simple, it would already be done. Ayanna frowned. What do you mean? Carter turned to her, his voice lower now, more controlled. If she's been getting away with this for so long, despite complaints, then she has protection. Someone high up has been covering for her. The word sent a chill down Ayanna's spine. Why would anyone protect her? Carter shook his head. That's what I need to find out. He turned back to the panel on the table, pulling up more security logs. Let's see who signed off on your removal. Ayanna and Jordan leaned in as Carter scrolled through records. A list of names and timestamps appeared, and there it was, the authorization for her removal. But something was off. Jordan squinted at the screen. Wait, why does that name look familiar? Ayanna's breath caught as she read the name aloud. L. Whitmore. Carter's expression darkened. Laura Whitmore. Jordan snapped his fingers. That's the regional manager, right? Carter nodded slowly. She oversees multiple airports, including this one. If she's the one approving removals like this, it means she's been involved in more than just this case. Ayanna clenched her fists. So she knew. She knew it was wrong and signed off anyway. Carter's face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something calculating. It gets worse, he muttered, scrolling further. Then he stopped, his entire body going still. Jordan peered closer. What is it? Carter's jaw tightened. Whitmore isn't just approving removals. She's taking bribes to do it. Ayanna's stomach dropped. Bribes? Carter nodded grimly. According to these logs, certain passengers, usually those in higher-paying seats, have been offered priority boarding or last-minute upgrades, even when flights were overbooked. The only way that happens is if someone else is taken off. Ayanna's mind reeled. You're saying people have been kicked off flights just so someone else could get their seat? Carter's silence was answer enough. Jordan let out a low whistle. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Ayanna gritted her teeth. This wasn't just about me. She's been doing this to other people. Carter nodded. And if Whitmore's involved, there's no telling how deep this goes. Ayanna inhaled sharply, anger rising in her chest. So what do we do? Carter's gaze was sharp. I don't make a move until I know exactly who I'm up against. If I act too soon, she'll bury the evidence before I can touch her. Ayanna shook her head. No, we can't just sit on this. Carter studied her. What are you thinking? Ayanna straightened, determination burning in her eyes. We go public. Jordan's eyebrows shot up. Public. She nodded. They ignored the complaints before because they were behind closed doors. But if this story gets out, if people see the proof, they won't be able to ignore it. Carter exhaled, considering. That's a risk. If she sees it coming, she'll try to spin it. Ayanna crossed her arms. Then we make sure she can't. For the first time, Carter smiled. Just slightly. You've got fire, I'll give you that. Jordan grinned. So what's the plan? Carter turned back to the screen, the evidence glowing under the dim conference room lights. We expose her. But we have to be smart about it. Ayanna's heart pounded. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was bigger than one flight, one incident. And if Whitmore thought she could silence people forever, she was about to learn otherwise. Ayanna barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind raced with everything that had happened. The video footage, the corruption, the people who had been wronged without ever realizing what was happening behind the scenes. It wasn't just about her anymore. This was bigger than she had ever imagined. And she wasn't about to back down. By morning, the plan was already in motion. Carter had pulled strings to get the evidence in front of the right people, while Jordan reached out to reporters. Ayanna, meanwhile, crafted her own message. She knew that people needed to hear the story straight from her. It wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about making sure it couldn't be ignored. Hours later, as she sat in front of the camera, she took a deep breath and hit record. She spoke from the heart, laying out everything that had happened. From the moment she was kicked off the flight to the moment she saw the proof of what was really going on. She showed the footage, the documents, and the names behind it all. And when she was done, she uploaded it, knowing there was no turning back. The response was immediate. Within minutes, comments flooded in, filled with outrage and support. People began sharing her story, and soon, it was everywhere. News outlets picked it up, and social media exploded with demands for answers. Then, the airline responded. A hastily written statement appeared on their official page, claiming they were looking into the matter. But Ayanna knew that wasn't enough. And apparently, neither did the public. As pressure mounted, the airline was forced to take action. The flight attendant was fired, and an internal investigation was launched. But the real turning point came when an anonymous whistleblower stepped forward, revealing even more damaging information about Whitmore's involvement. It wasn't just priority upgrades. There were missing funds, falsified reports, and years of hidden complaints that had been swept under the rug. With mounting evidence, Whitmore was removed from her position. But the final twist came when Carter called Ayanna late that evening, his voice filled with something she hadn't heard before, genuine amusement. "You're not going to believe this," he said. Ayanna sat up. "Try me." "The board just reached out to me," Carter continued. "They're offering you a deal." Her brows furrowed. "A deal?" Carter chuckled. "They want to avoid a bigger scandal. They're offering a public apology, a hefty settlement, and a seat on the board." Ayanna's breath caught. "Wait, what?" "They're handing you a piece of the airline," Carter said. "Not just to keep you quiet, but because they know they need to fix their image. And what better way than to bring in the person who exposed them?" Ayanna sat there, stunned. A week ago, she had been thrown off a plane. Now, she had a seat at the table. The irony wasn't lost on her. She exhaled, a slow smile forming. "Guess they didn't see that coming." Jordan laughed from across the room. "Neither did we." Ayanna looked out the window, the city lights blinking in the distance. She had started this fight because she wanted justice. And now, she had the power to make sure no one else went through what she did. It wasn't just about winning. It was about changing the game. Ayanna sat in stunned silence, Carter's words still echoing in her mind. A seat on the board? She had fought for justice, for accountability, not for power. And yet, here she was, being offered a position within the very company that had tried to silence her. Jordan leaned forward, his expression torn between excitement and disbelief. "So, what are you going to do?" Ayanna exhaled slowly, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know. It feels weird. Like, am I just letting them clean up their mess by giving me a fancy title?" Carter chuckled, shaking his head. "Not if you play it right. You'd have a say in company policies. You could make real changes." She let that thought settle. All her life, she had been told to take what she was given, to not rock the boat too much. But she had fought for this moment. She had exposed the truth when no one else would. If they thought they could use her for a PR stunt, they were wrong. The next morning, Ayanna sat in a sleek office overlooking the city, her fingers tapping against the glossy conference table. Across from her sat members of the airline's executive team, their faces a mixture of forced humility and nervous politeness. They had spent the last 10 minutes apologizing, emphasizing how seriously they were taking the situation. She let them finish before speaking. "I don't want an empty title," she said, her voice steady. "If I join this board, I want real authority to make changes. No more sweeping complaints under the rug. No more unethical removals. Transparency in hiring and promotion practices. Training to prevent bias in decision-making. And an independent oversight team to make sure it actually happens." The CEO, an older man with silver hair, adjusted his tie. "That's a lot of reform." Ayanna didn't blink. "Then it sounds like you have a lot of work to do." Silence stretched between them. Then, after a long pause, he nodded. "You're right." Over the next few months, things changed. The airline introduced a new complaint review system, making sure incidents like Ayanna's would never be buried again. Employees received better training, and customers were given clearer policies on their rights. Whitmore's involvement led to legal action, with more employees coming forward about her corruption. The flight attendant who had started it all disappeared from the industry entirely. Ayanna adjusted to her new role carefully, making sure she never became the kind of person who forgot where she came from. She wasn't just there to look good in headlines. She was there to make sure no one else had to go through what she did. One evening, months after the scandal had finally settled, Ayanna found herself back at the airport. Same terminal. Same airline. Only this time, she wasn't just another passenger. She watched as travelers moved around her, some hurrying to their gates, others waiting patiently to board. The airport felt different now. Maybe because she knew that behind the scenes, real change had happened. Jordan nudged her arm. "Crazy how things turn out, huh?" She smiled. "Yeah, it really is." As she stepped onto her flight, no one stopped her. No one questioned if she belonged. She took her seat, gazing out the window as the plane taxied down the runway. The past few months had been a whirlwind, but she had no regrets. She had fought for herself. She had fought for others. And now, she was exactly where she was meant to be.